Love can be painful, but for some, it can be even worse. Almost 50% of the global population develops patterns that cause significant suffering and difficulties in forming bonds with others. Why do some people flee and push you away as soon as a relationship becomes serious, while others cling desperately to their partners? Why do some seek love only to destroy it shortly after, swinging between "I hate you" and "please don't leave me"? These behaviors might seem absurd to you, but there's a very good reason why people act this way. The truth is that the way we love is not random. It is influenced by our attachment style. And today, we're going to explore all the attachment styles we develop both as children and as adults. We'll look at the problems that cause all this suffering and how to solve them. And that's not all. We'll debunk some common myths about this topic and understand what science really says. By the end, you'll have a detailed map to decode every significant relationship in your life. You'll better understand your partner, your friends, your parents, your children, and most importantly, yourself. Before we begin, I want to prepare you psychologically. This will be a long and in-depth video. Keep in mind that I've used about 50 different resources, including books, scientific studies, experiments, and articles. It's important to have a solid scientific foundation for a topic like this, so know that all the resources used are listed in the video description. To understand what attachment styles are, we need to talk about this man. His name is John Bowlby, and he was the British psychologist and psychoanalyst who formulated the attachment theory in 1969. This theory posits that the bond between a child and their caregivers influences their emotional development and future relationships. Caregivers are the individuals who care for the child and provide protection, security, and emotional support. Initially, Bowlby emphasized the idea of monotropy, the tendency of a child to form a primary attachment with just one caregiver, typically the mother. According to Bowlby, the first years of our lives are crucial for building self-esteem and an internal sense of security that allows us to explore the world. The environment in which we grow up plays a decisive role in constructing this sense of security. Children are born with a biological need to attach to an adult who will take care of them. After all, they are vulnerable and cannot survive on their own. They depend entirely on adults. In some cases, children grow up in a safe family environment, filled with love and acceptance, where they are listened to and their emotions are neither judged nor ignored, but instead accepted. However, this is not always the case. When such an environment is lacking, insecurity develops, which can have a significant impact on adult life. This theory was quite revolutionary for its time. Indeed, the traditional psychoanalytic community harshly criticized it. For instance, many psychoanalysts, using Freud as a reference, believed that attachment was based solely on fulfilling primary needs like feeding rather than an emotional need for security and closeness. Bowlby proposed a new way of understanding personality development and relationships. To support his theory, he used several studies. Two of the most famous were Harry Harlow's studies on rhesus monkeys and Bowlby's observations of orphaned children during World War II. Harlow conducted experiments in which baby monkeys were separated from their biological mothers and placed in cages with two artificial mothers. One was made of wire mesh, but provided milk. The other did not provide food, but was covered with soft fabric and offered warmth through a light bulb. Here's how the baby monkeys behaved.
Let me show you a monkey raised on a nursing wire mother. Now here are 106's two mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch.
He's going to the wire mother.
He's got to eat to live.
Oh, he's going back.
He's back on the cloth mother, and he'll stay on the cloth mother. Actually, this baby spends from 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother. We had predicted that the variable of contact comfort would be a variable of measurable importance, but we were unprepared to find that it completely overwhelmed and overshadowed all other variables, including those of nursing.
The results showed that the baby monkeys spent much more time clinging to the soft mother, seeking emotional comfort, and only approached the wire mother to feed. In another test, researchers wanted to see how these monkeys would react in a highly stressful situation. They placed a baby monkey in an unfamiliar room with toys and other objects. Here's how it reacted.
This is a 6-foot square room with a few toys and other objects, but to the monkey, it's much more menacing. We know that when our own children are taken to a strange place without their mothers, they are often overwhelmed with fear. This room is just such a new and strange environment for the baby monkeys. No mother is in there. Now, let's put a monkey into the room. Notice how cautiously he enters the room. He's searching for comfort, but nothing relieves his disturbance.
Unfortunately, nothing could comfort the baby monkey, which remained very frightened. But now, let's see what happens when the wire mother that provides milk is introduced into the room. Here's what happened.
Now we'll take the baby monkey out and put in a wire mother.
Now, this one was nursed by a wire mother.
That's right, all his life.
She doesn't seem to help much.
Once again, nothing changed. Finally, they replaced the wire mother with the soft one providing warmth. Here's what happened.
Now, we'll try the same test with the cloth mother in the room. You see the contrast in the behavior? Despite the fact that the wire mother nursed him, she could offer this infant nothing in the way of affection or security. But here the monkey, by rubbing against the cloth mother, as if he were seeking as much contact comfort as he could get, builds up his reservoir of affection and security. First, his body relaxes as the fear disappears. But above and beyond this, new positive response patterns appear. He now goes out to explore and investigate this new, strange world. He is now a normal, happy, curious baby.
The baby monkey rushed to the soft mother, and after receiving the emotional support it needed, it began exploring the room. The other famous study was conducted directly by Bowlby. He studied children who had been separated from their parents during the war and raised in orphanages or hospitals. He noticed that even though they received adequate food and physical care, many of them developed emotional problems, depression, and other difficulties in forming relationships. This indicated that the absence of a stable attachment figure had negative effects on their development. For years, Bowlby's theory remained controversial, but it gradually began to gain traction. However, something fundamental was missing. There was no systematic or scientific way to categorize this theory. That is, until this woman, named Mary Ainsworth, contributed to giving a more scientific and empirical approach to attachment theory. Thanks to a study conducted in Uganda and later in the United States, Ainsworth developed the strange situation procedure. Here's how the strange situation is structured. It is typically used for children aged 12 to 18 months and is divided into 8 phases. 1. The child and parent are introduced into a room with toys. 2. The child explores the environment while the parent is present. 3. A stranger enters and interacts first with the parent and then with the child. 4. The parent leaves the room, leaving the child with the stranger. 5. The parent returns and the stranger leaves. 6. The parent leaves again and the child remains alone. 7. The stranger re-enters the room. 8. The parent returns and the stranger leaves. During this procedure, observers evaluate how the child explores the environment, their interaction with the stranger, their reaction to being separated from the parent, their behavior when reunited with the parent. Through these strange situations, Ainsworth identified 3 attachment styles. The first is called secure attachment. To explain children's attachment styles, I need to introduce you to some of my friends. Here's the first one. This is Michael, a lovely 14-month-old. Michael's mom wants to discover his attachment style, so she takes him to do the strange situation. Here's how he reacts. Michael moves confidently around the room, freely exploring while his mom is present. Occasionally, he glances back at her to make sure she's still there, as if her gaze reassures him that he can continue playing without worry. When the stranger enters, Michael pauses for a moment and observes them with curiosity. After a brief evaluation, he interacts with them. He doesn't show fear, but also doesn't display excessive attachment. However, when his mom leaves the room, something changes. Michael stiffens slightly, looks around, and, not seeing her, his face begins to show sadness. His discomfort quickly escalates, and he starts crying. The stranger tries to comfort him. Michael partially accepts their help, but it's clear that his main need is to have his mom back. As soon as his mom returns, Michael reacts immediately. He runs toward her with outstretched arms to be picked up. His crying stops almost instantly, as he clings to her for a moment. After receiving the reassurance he needed, he quickly calms down and resumes exploring with the same confidence as before. Michael's secure attachment allows him to explore the room confidently because he has a secure base to rely on, in this case, his mom. While playing in the room, he occasionally checks in with her. Seeing her reassures him and encourages him to continue playing and exploring. In general, parents of securely attached children tend to play more with their kids. They also respond more quickly and sensitively to their children's needs, compared to parents of children with other attachment styles. Children with secure attachment tend to be more empathetic as they grow older. They are also described as less disruptive, less aggressive, and more mature than other children. Michael has learned that he can express his emotions, desires, and needs because he trusts that his mom or dad will take care of him. This builds a secure emotional foundation. Children who develop this attachment style are not ignored or scolded when they cry. The caregiver approaches them, tries to understand what's wrong, and how to calm them, whether by changing their diaper, feeding them, or simply holding them. Every time parents behave this way, it creates positive reinforcement. The child strengthens their belief that expressing needs is safe and that help will come when needed. Later on, we'll see how all of this translates into adult attachment styles. For now, let's move on to the other styles in children. The second attachment style is called avoidant attachment. Now, I want to introduce you to my second friend, James. James is 16 months old, and his mom also takes him to the strange situation. Here's how he reacts. Like Michael, James freely explores his environment. He moves confidently among the toys and appears comfortable. However, unlike other children, he doesn't look back at his mom for reassurance before returning to play. He seems completely independent. When the stranger enters, James shows no signs of discomfort. He treats them exactly as he treats his mom. He doesn't pay attention unless approached by them. He doesn't seek comfort or reassurance. He simply continues playing as if nothing has changed. When his mom leaves the room, his reaction is surprisingly neutral. He does not cry, search for her, or show any visible signs of distress. He remains focused on his activities as though her absence makes no difference. When his mom returns, James completely ignores her. Avoidant children might not reject a parent's attention outright, but don't seek comfort or contact either. They show no preference between their parent and a complete stranger. A child who develops this attachment style likely has a caregiver who often ignored or dismissed their emotions. They've learned they cannot communicate emotional distress in order to get help. They stop seeking assistance for their needs and desires because they've learned they cannot rely on their caregiver. They must fend for themselves. During the strange situation experiment, James appears indifferent when his mother enters or leaves, but this is only on the surface. His stress levels, heart rate, and cortisol levels are elevated throughout these moments of separation and reunion. It's implausible for a 16-month-old child to exhibit such high self-sufficiency. It's all an act. He doesn't do it intentionally, but has adapted by responding in an emotionally distant manner. Unlike Michael, James doesn't have a secure base to rely on while exploring. Even though he explores, he does it more out of habit than from a real sense of security. His apparent independence isn't a sign of emotional strength, but an adaptation strategy. He avoids showing vulnerability because he's learned he won't receive support. The caregiver of an avoidant child tends to leave them alone often, expecting them to be independent. They might have scolded them for asking for help or expressing their distress. They might have rejected their needs or taken too long to satisfy them. Parents of avoidant children tend to be less involved in playtime or interactions overall. James will suffer quite a bit from this when he grows up. Finally, we arrive at the third style, anxious ambivalent attachment. Let me introduce you to my third friend, Maria. Maria has just turned 12 months old. Like Michael and James, she is brought in by her mom to do the strange situation. Here's how she reacts. Maria doesn't enjoy exploring her environment much. She stays close to her mom, often clinging to her or seeking physical contact, and rarely lets her out of sight. She plays very little, and when she does, she frequently stops to check if her mom is still there. When the stranger enters the room, Maria's anxiety visibly increases. Her body stiffens, her movement becomes more uncertain, and she looks at the stranger with distrust. She is less calm, more alert, and her attention is almost entirely absorbed by the presence of this new figure. Her wariness prevents her from playing or interacting with at them, even when the stranger gently tries to engage her. When her mom leaves the room, Maria immediately shows signs of distress. She freezes for a moment, then tries to follow her, but cannot reach her. As soon as the door closes, she bursts into desperate crying. With a flushed face and irregular breathing, the stranger attempts to console her by speaking softly or offering a toy, but Maria is inconsolable. When her mom returns, Maria rushes toward her but continues crying even when picked up. She clings tightly, as if afraid her mom might leave again, but simultaneously squirms and lightly hits her mom with her hands. Even as her mom soothes or speaks gently to her, Maria struggles to calm down, and her crying subsides only very slowly. When her mom leaves again, the sense of despair immediately returns. Maria runs toward the door and then collapses to the floor, screaming and sobbing uncontrollably. She is completely overwhelmed. When her mom comes back again, Maria's reaction is similar to before. She clings tightly to her while continuing to cry even after being picked up. Children with anxious ambivalent attachment appear anxious even in the presence of their caregiver and tend to be very distrustful of strangers. When the parent leaves the room, their distress is immediate and intense. They cry desperately, become agitated, and try to follow them. However, the key point is that even when the parent returns, the child struggles to calm down. They want their parent close, but simultaneously seem angry at them. Sometimes they passively reject them by turning away. Other times they express outright anger by kicking or crying even harder. It's as if they are torn between wanting comfort and fearing that their parent might leave again, hence the term ambivalent. Why does this attachment style develop? The primary cause is inconsistency in the caregiver's behavior. An ambivalent child never knows what to expect. Sometimes the caregiver is present, affectionate, and attentive. Other times they are distant, distracted, or overwhelmed by their own emotions. This creates a constant sense of uncertainty and insecurity in the child. A typical example is a parent who works long hours every day. When they're home, they might be very affectionate, trying to make up for lost time by playing with and cuddling their child, but then disappear again for long hours or even days. For the child, each separation feels like a small abandonment because they don't know when or how their parent will return. During their absence, they may spend extended periods with grandparents or in daycare settings where interactions are more detached and less personalized, further fueling their insecurity. Mary Ainsworth developed the strange situation in 1969, and over the next 17 years, hundreds, if not thousands, of studies were conducted using this procedure. However, during these 17 years, researchers began encountering problems. Increasingly, they observed children whose reactions did not fit into any of the three established attachment styles. Clearly, there was a missing piece, at least until 1986. In 1986, Mary Main and Judith Solomon introduced a fourth attachment style, which they called disorganized attachment. Let me introduce you to my last friend, Anna. Anna is 17 months old and is the final child to undergo the strange situation. Here's how she reacts. Anna moves uncertainly around the room, displaying behaviors that are difficult to interpret. She doesn't explore her environment confidently and seems torn between wanting to approach her mother and avoiding contact altogether. Her movements are often contradictory. She approaches her mom, but with her head turned the other way, only to suddenly stop and freeze in a rigid, unnatural posture. When the stranger enters the room, Anna appears disoriented. She stares at them blankly, without any facial expression, and then begins rocking in place while repeatedly touching her hair. She doesn't seek comfort from her mother, but when her mom leaves the room, she starts crying desperately. However, after about 40 seconds, she abruptly stops and seems confused. Her distress is evident, but she doesn't seem to have a coherent strategy for dealing with the stressful situation. When her mom returns, Anna runs toward her, but stops halfway before approaching again. She lets herself be hugged while remaining physically very rigid. Children with a disorganized attachment style exhibit chaotic and unpredictable behaviors. They lack consistent strategies for managing their relationships with the caregiver. Unlike other attachment styles, their behaviors are contradictory and disoriented, combining elements of ambivalent and avoidant attachment. These children may seek proximity to their caregiver during moments of stress, but then appear frightened or confused, as if they don't know whether to approach or move away. They may react with asymmetrical movements, rigid postures, vacant stares, freezing in place, or facial expressions that seem inappropriate for the context. They also frequently display stereotyped movements, meaning repetitive actions without any apparent purpose, such as rocking back and forth, continuously moving their hands or fingers in front of their face, repeatedly turning their head without apparent reason, walking in circles, or taking repetitive steps without a clear direction. The disorganization stems from a paradox. The caregiver, who should be a source of safety, is also perceived as a threat. This often occurs in traumatic family environments where the caregiver's behavior frightens or neglects the child. For example, a parent might alternate between moments of affection and presence and episodes of abuse or neglect, creating an unpredictable and destabilizing environment. In such cases, the child finds themselves in a no-way-out situation. Their attachment system drives them to seek comfort from their caregiver, but their defense system makes them fearful of that same person. A concrete example is a parent struggling with alcoholism or drug addiction. On some days, they may be loving and present. On others, they might become aggressive or entirely absent. This unpredictability prevents the child from developing a stable strategy for coping with stress or relationships. The caregiver's behavior is often linked to unresolved traumas, abuse, severe depression, or domestic violence. Studies have shown that unresolved traumas significantly increase the likelihood of developing a disorganized attachment style. For instance, research by Main and Hess found that many mothers of children with disorganized attachment had experienced significant losses or traumas shortly before or after their child's birth. Additionally, Solomon and George observed that mothers with unresolved grief or trauma displayed frightened or frightening behaviors during interactions with their children. More than 50% of children with disorganized attachment had mothers who had unresolved losses or traumas. We're almost ready to discuss adult attachment styles. Just one more step to go. Before explaining them to you, I have a question. How do you think we identify them? I mean, we've seen that we can use the strange situation for children from 12 to 18 months, but what about adults? It would be strange and probably fun for me to sit in a room full of toys with my mom, but it wouldn't be very useful. And this isn't the only problem. How do we identify attachment styles in children younger than 12 months or older than 18 months? Don't worry, we'll cover this quickly now. For adults, there are two main methods. One, self-assessment questionnaires, which allow individuals to answer questions about how they relate in intimate relationships. Two, coded interviews, based on the adult attachment interview conducted by professionals who analyze responses to determine attachment styles. For children under 12 months, there's often a tendency to wait before doing tests. However, one method, although not widely used, is the Massey-Campbell Attachment Scale, used for children between 6 and 18 months to observe interactions between parents and children in neutral situations. For children over the age of 2, there are several tools available, including modified versions of the strange situation, such as the preschool assessment of attachment, the MacArthur Story STEM battery, where the child completes incomplete scenarios, revealing attachment patterns, the attachment story completion task, similar to the MacArthur, the Q-sort attachment, which involves observing the child at home or in a natural environment, or school observations for older children. And what about adolescents? For adolescents aged 14 to 15 and older, the adult attachment interview is used. This method analyzes childhood memories and how they are processed. Another tool is the child attachment interview, designed for children aged 7 to 15. It is a shorter version of the adult attachment interview. Additionally, there is the Inventory of Parent and Peer Attachment, or IPPA, which measures attachment to parents and friends. What's the difference between a securely attached adolescent and one with an insecure attachment, meaning all the other attachment styles? In a study conducted by Freeman and Brown on 99 students, they found that adolescents with secure attachment tend to view their mother as their primary attachment figure more than their father, friends, or romantic partners. Generally, they see their parent as the main source of emotional support. However, when in a romantic relationship, they perceive maternal support as less relevant, but still do not identify their partner as their primary attachment figure. Adolescents with insecure attachment, on the other hand, tend to seek emotional support primarily from peers or romantic partners rather than parents. Nearly 1/3 of avoidantly attached adolescents identify themselves as their own primary attachment figure. And believe me, This shouldn't come as a surprise. Soon, we'll understand why. Bowlby, Ainsworth, and Main primarily focused on parent-child attachment. Later, researchers like Hazan, Shaver, and Bartholomew extended the concept of attachment to adult relationships, demonstrating that attachment styles profoundly influence how we love and allow others to love us. The styles we'll explore can have a drastic impact on our relationships. They can lead to healthy and fulfilling connections, or to constant struggles filled with pain, arguments, and eventual separations. You've probably noticed that different people have different ways of forming and maintaining emotional bonds with others. Do you remember Michael? Michael has grown up and developed a secure attachment style even in his adult relationships. Thanks to a childhood filled with consistent and sensitive care, Michael has built a stable emotional foundation that continues to support him as an adult. This allows him to feel comfortable forming deep connections with others while maintaining healthy independence. He is equally at ease being alone. Not only does he trust those around him, but he also trusts himself, resulting in good self-esteem and a stable identity. When Michael enters a romantic relationship, he tends to build it on mutual trust. He's happy for his partner to rely on him, and equally happy to have someone he can rely on. With this type of attachment style, you feel comfortable asking your partner for help without always needing to solve all your problems alone. And by problems, I don't just mean practical ones like, can you pick up my mom from the airport, but also emotional ones, like seeking support when sharing your inner struggles. Michael feels completely at ease with emotional closeness in his relationship without fear of being too involved. He is capable of openly communicating his emotions and needs without fear of being judged or rejected. He sees sex and emotional intimacy as closely interconnected. Michael tends to forgive quickly, but sometimes relationships don't work out. When this happens, he feels pain like anyone else, but remembers that there are other people out there with whom he can build meaningful connections. If conflicts arise, Michael approaches them calmly and empathetically, seeking constructive solutions rather than attacking or manipulating his partner. Another important aspect of his attachment style is his ability to respect others' needs. For example, if his partner tells him she needs time for herself, Michael doesn't feel rejected or think, she doesn't want me anymore, she must want to leave. On the contrary, he understands that taking space is natural and healthy in a relationship. Similarly, he knows he can count on his partner during tough times and offers the same kind of support when needed. Michael is also comfortable showing his vulnerability, a fundamental element for building emotional intimacy. This makes him someone others can rely on and connect with easily. Famous fictional characters who exhibit various characteristics of this attachment style include Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings, Mufasa from The Lion King, Ted Lasso from Ted Lasso, Steve Rogers from Captain America. Now, let's address a very important aspect. According to a meta-analysis of over 200 studies on adult attachment styles, 58% of people have a secure attachment style. This means that nearly half of the population has an insecure attachment style. Like Michael, Maria has grown up. As an adult, she has retained her attachment style, the anxious ambivalent attachment. Maria has always had a strong need for emotional closeness and a deep fear of rejection and abandonment. This likely stems from a childhood where she experienced inconsistent or unpredictable care, which led her to develop a sense of insecurity in relationships. As an adult, this insecurity manifests as a constant need for reassurance and validation from her partner or those close to her. When Maria enters a romantic relationship, she tends to idealize her partner and romanticize love. She needs to feel constantly desired and loved to soothe her inner fears. She often oscillates between the desire for love and the fear of not being worthy of it. If she perceives even the slightest sign of emotional distance, her mind can spiral into catastrophic thoughts. What if they don't love me anymore? What if they leave me? This often leads to hyper-vigilant behaviors, such as obsessively checking her phone for messages from her partner or trying to spend as much time as possible with them. Maria may also struggle with managing conflict. For her, every argument represents a potential threat to the stability of the relationship. She fears that conflict could lead to a breakup, so she tends to avoid expressing her own needs or desires out of fear of bothering her partner. At the same time, this fear can lead to contradictory behaviors. On one hand, she seeks comfort and closeness from her partner. On the other hand, she may express anger or frustration when she feels neglected. A defining trait of the anxious attachment style is emotional dependence on others. Maria struggles to be alone alone and often measures her self-worth through the eyes of others. If someone accepts and loves her, she feels valuable. But if she perceives rejection or distance, she begins to question her own worth. Key characteristics of anxious attachment include intense fear of abandonment, rejection, and exclusion, constant need for reassurance and validation, difficulty managing solitude, a tendency to prioritize others' needs over her own, high sensitivity to criticism, difficulty regulating emotions without external support, low self-esteem, jealous tendencies, reliance on the partner for emotional regulation and fulfillment of needs, but in a conditional way. If the partner is reassuring and available, there's security. Otherwise, anxiety and doubts arise. Under stress, these traits become even more pronounced. Often unconsciously, Maria may express her vulnerability more intensely, hoping to reduce the likelihood of being abandoned. After all, when someone is visibly suffering, it's harder for others to walk away. She's heard terms like too clingy or a bit suffocating used about her more than once. If her partner has to leave for a few days, the anxiety about the impending separation becomes palpable. On the day they say goodbye, it's painful for her. Let's talk about Maria's tests. Sometimes, without even realizing it, Maria tests her partner by making a sharp comment, suddenly becoming distant, or bringing up a sensitive issue. She doesn't do this out of malice, but out of need. She wants to ensure that her partner will stay even during difficult times. Paradoxically, though, these tests risk turning her fears into reality by pushing away the very person she needs. It's similar to what happens in the strange situation. The ambivalently attached child desires comfort from their caregiver, but simultaneously expresses anger and pushes them away. Maria does the same. She seeks security, but in ways that might jeopardize it. When a relationship ends, it's devastating for Maria. She'll do or say anything to prevent it from happening, even completely sacrificing herself if necessary. But when it truly ends, the pain she feels is immense, far greater than what someone with secure attachment might experience. Interestingly, anxious attachment tends to be more prevalent in women than in men. Famous fictional characters who exhibit various characteristics of this attachment style include Bella Swan in Twilight, Ross Geller in Friends, Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad, Rue Bennett in Euphoria. And guess what? James has grown up and become an adult too, and has retained his avoidant attachment style. I have to be honest, the first time I read about this attachment style's characteristics, I thought, someone secretly planted a spy in my brain and wrote down exactly what I think. It's embarrassingly accurate. But back to James. James learned early on to rely only on himself. Likely during childhood, his emotional needs were ignored or minimized, leading him to believe that showing vulnerability was useless or even dangerous. As he grew up, this belief became deeply ingrained, making him an adult who avoids intimacy and prefers maintaining emotional distance from others. When James enters a romantic relationship, he prioritizes protecting his autonomy above all else. Emotional closeness and intimacy make him uncomfortable because he perceives them as threats to his freedom. James feels confident managing his emotions on his own and often suppresses them. While this strategy doesn't benefit him in the long term, at least it means he doesn't have to ask anyone for help. This makes him appear cold or distant, but in reality, it's a protective mechanism. He avoids showing vulnerability out of fear of being hurt or rejected. If a relationship becomes too emotionally intense, James might quickly pull away or even end it without apparent difficulty. A distinctive aspect of the avoidant attachment style is its strong emphasis on independence. James firmly believes that everyone should meet their own emotional needs without relying on others. This leads him to view people who seek support as too needy or clingy. After all, if the benchmark is himself, who practically never asks for support, anyone appears too needy. He doesn't believe anyone is capable of meeting his emotional needs and doesn't trust others in this regard. For example, he might trust a friend who helps him fix a leaky sink because they're a plumber, but he wouldn't trust that same person with his emotions or vulnerabilities. In fact, when someone tries to care for him emotionally, he might find it inappropriate and feel uncomfortable. An avoidant adult has learned that vulnerability is never acceptable. It's full of risks and can harm both him and the people they care about. Additionally, James tends to have few intimate relationships, whether with a partner, friends, or family members. For instance, if his partner threatens to leave him, he might give the impression that he doesn't care. and end the relationship himself. When James's relationships end, he experiences far less sadness and pain compared to those with anxious or secure attachment styles. James also has limited capacity to support his partner's emotions and needs during stressful times. He believes he doesn't need anyone in his life. He doesn't need love or deep relationships. In reality, he unconsciously fears that he's unworthy of love, and to avoid the risk of rejection, he prefers to reject love first. Both avoidant and anxious adults are hypersensitive to rejection, but react oppositely to positive signals. Someone with an anxious attachment finds reassurance in compliments and positive feedback, which makes them feel worthy of love and acceptance. The avoidant adult, on the other hand, reacts in the opposite way. When they receive compliments, they don't appreciate them much and rarely show enthusiasm. They may seem detached or indifferent. After all, accepting a compliment and allowing themselves to enjoy it means lowering their defenses and granting others emotional influence, something that could threaten their autonomy. It might seem like anxious and avoidant individuals are entirely incompatible, so they would never enter into a romantic relationship together, right? Wrong. Anxious avoidant couples are relatively common. This type of dynamic is often referred to as the attachment trap or the attachment dance. Strangely enough, these relationships tend to last longer than expected. The avoidant partner unconsciously confirms their belief that those who aren't self-sufficient suffer too much. After all, they've often seen their anxious partner in distress. Meanwhile, the anxious partner unconsciously confirms their belief that love is unstable and requires constant effort to gain attention. They frequently experience uncertainty and emotional highs and lows caused by the avoidant partner's distance. The avoidant partner appreciates having someone who takes the initiative in the relationship, reducing the pressure on them to express affection or intimacy. The fact that the anxious partner continues to pursue them also provides a form of validation for their self-worth, boosting their self-esteem. On the other hand, when the avoidant partner occasionally moves closer emotionally, even if rarely, the anxious partner feels immense relief and validation. The problem with these relationships is that often, the anxious partner constantly seeks reassurance and closeness. The avoidant partner withdraws emotionally when feeling pressured. This creates a stressful and painful chase and flight cycle for both parties. Levels of conflict are high. Mutual satisfaction is low. Communication is often challenging. But why would someone choose or stay in a relationship that causes them so much pain? It doesn't make sense, right? Yet often, the fear isn't about suffering itself, but about facing something unknown. People feel safer managing a familiar kind of pain rather than risking an unfamiliar type of relationship, fearing it could be even worse. This is one reason why, in extreme cases, someone might stay with an abusive partner for years. Another reason that anxious and avoidant individuals are drawn together is that the anxious partner, who feels insecure and craves attention, may be attracted to an avoidant partner who represents strength and independence. In this way, the anxious individual may feel completed or stabilized by the avoidant figure. In contrast, the avoidant partner may be drawn to the anxious one because being desired reinforces their sense of worth without requiring too much emotional involvement. And finally, as the saying goes, hope dies last. Both partners may continue believing, often unconsciously, that the other will change over time. The anxious partner might hope that the avoidant one will open up and become more affectionate, while the avoidant partner might hope that the anxious one will learn to be more independent and reduce emotional pressure. Among all attachment styles, avoidant attachment is the only one more commonly observed in men than women. Famous fictional characters who exhibit various characteristics of this attachment style include James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, Bruce Wayne in Batman, Tony Stark in Iron Man, Dr. House, and Elle in Death Note. Last but not least, we meet Anna. She, too, has maintained her disorganized attachment style into adulthood. Anna experienced a childhood marked by traumatic experiences and inconsistent care. Her caregivers were at once sources of fear and comfort, creating within her an unresolved conflict between the need for protection and the instinct to flee. Studying the characteristics of this style, one wonders, how do these individuals manage to survive such emotional chaos? The disorganized style takes the worst of both the avoidant and the the anxious styles and combines them together. When Anna enters a relationship, it's as if she has two brains at war. One day, she desperately seeks closeness with her partner, fearing abandonment and thinking things like, if he doesn't reply to my message within 5 minutes, it means he doesn't want me. The next day, she feels suffocated by the very intimacy she has so desperately craved, and she switches into flight mode, thinking, this situation is getting too serious. I feel suffocated. Her behavior is a contradictory puzzle. She might confess her passionate love to you and then block you on social media 2 hours later for no apparent reason. This ambivalence often leads her into chaotic relationships, where passion and conflict mix into a toxic cocktail. Individuals with an insecure avoidant style, like James, tend to prefer casual relationships and remain in the dating phase for an extended period. It's a situation that is neither too intimate nor overly demanding, in which they feel much more comfortable than in a defined relationship. The disorganized style shares this tendency, though it can be even more pronounced. This is confirmed by a 2019 study by Favez and Tiso, which found that people with this attachment style tend to have a higher number of sexual partners compared to those with other attachment styles. The result is a cycle in which these individuals seek connection through sex, but at the same time distance themselves to avoid the risk of emotional vulnerability, often leading them to seek new partners. This can reinforce the belief that neither they nor others truly know how to love. While an avoidant person like James builds walls to protect himself, Anna alternates between pickaxes to tear them down and cement to rebuild them. If a relationship ends, she does not experience the cold indifference of someone like James, nor the overwhelming pain of the anxious like Maria. Instead, she may feel a confused mix of relief, panic, and self-hatred. Like those with an avoidant style, Anna struggles a lot to open up and discuss her emotions, and she doesn't trust others to provide emotional support or understanding. However, while the avoidant at least relies on themselves to manage their emotions, someone with a disorganized style trusts neither themselves nor others. This makes it impossible to develop a truly effective coping strategy, whereas Maria, with her anxious style, can at least seek refuge in others. Anna doesn't even have this possibility. Consequently, her relationships are often unstable and unpredictable. It is a style characterized by a significant fear of rejection, an inability to regulate one's emotions, contradictory behaviors, and high levels of anxiety. Anna has very few close bonds, not only in romantic settings but also with family and friends. Unfortunately, the disorganized attachment style is associated with a higher risk of developing various clinical disorders, including self-harm, mood disorders, personality disorders, and substance use disorders. Famous fictional characters you might be familiar with who have exhibited various characteristics of this attachment style include Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader in Star Wars, Arthur Fleck in Joker, Gollum or Smeagol in The Lord of the Rings, and Hisoka in Hunter x Hunter. At this point, you've probably figured out which attachment style you identify with most, and perhaps, while listening to the stories of James, Maria, Anna, and Michael, someone you know well came to mind. If I can give you some advice, share this video with that person and ask them which attachment style they think you have. Then try to discover which style they identify with. Sharing it will allow you to receive external feedback from someone who knows you well and could serve as an excellent starting point for a conversation, whether with a friend or a partner. Let's say that just like James, Maria, and Anna, you too have developed an insecure attachment style. So what? That's just how it is, right? You're wired this way and there's nothing you can do about it, right? After all, you didn't choose the environment in which you grew up, and no matter how hard you try, you can't turn back time. There is, however, a problem that I'm sure you've already identified. Having an insecure style is hard, frustrating, exhausting, oppressive, and painful. Unnecessarily painful. In short, as a dear friend of mine would say, it sucks. However, there's some excellent news. It doesn't have to keep sucking. In a study conducted by Waters and colleagues, the attachment styles of 60 infants were identified at 12 months of age. 20 years later, 50 of these participants were tested again for attachment style, and 28% of them received a different classification than they did as infants. I know 50 people isn't exactly a huge number, statistically speaking, but fortunately it wasn't the only study conducted on the subject. Another example is the study by Baldwin and Fair, this time with a total of 221 participants. The results were similar to the previous study. About 30% of people changed their attachment style. An especially interesting aspect concerns the timing. 30% of the participants changed their attachment style within a period ranging from just 1 week to several months. So yes, the attachment style can absolutely be modified. When the style changes from insecure to secure, it's called earned secure attachment. The question arises arises naturally. How does one acquire this style? The first phase consists of becoming aware of the existence of attachment styles, of the way they influence our relationships and our beliefs. I hope this video is helping you with that. The second phase is to recognize your own attachment style and compare it with the secure one. This will allow you to identify the dysfunctional beliefs associated with your insecure style and understand which more functional beliefs to replace them with. Knowing these beliefs is not enough. To change them, it's necessary to internalize them, and this is where the real challenge begins. Insecure beliefs are not merely ideas in your minds. They are often rooted in deep emotions and automatic patterns. To change them, we must confront emotional resistances and erroneous convictions about what we feel, because it is often the way we experience and interpret our emotions that prevents us from taking this step. This is why developing the ability to better understand and manage our emotions is crucial for building a more secure attachment. If you need help developing this skill, you can find a link in the description. To change your attachment style, however, something is still missing. An essential element is needed. Personally, the first time I discovered that I had an avoidant attachment style, I thought, this is the ideal one, the one everyone should aspire to. After all, the avoidant is independent, self-sufficient, and doesn't feel the need for emotional support. I had found a way to protect myself. By behaving in this way, I could keep my distance and avoid the risk of being disappointed or hurt. I could avoid not being understood. I could avoid being judged, criticized, or rejected. I had finally found a way to avoid a mountain of suffering. Honestly, I believed that there was no point in emotionally opening up and abandoning what I considered an ideal style in favor of a secure one, which in my eyes seemed objectively worse. Two things made me change my mind. The first was my romantic situation. I was suffering, and my girlfriend was suffering. I tried to change her, to make her better, to make her avoidant like me. I lost count of the times I couldn't understand the way she thought and acted. This situation was becoming really too heavy. I needed to do something. The second thing that made me change my mind was my partner's suggestion to study this stuff called attachment styles. After extensive research, I found several studies showing that people with a secure style were more satisfied with their relationships and suffered less. Initially, this seemed absurd to me. After all the systems and strategies I had put in place until then were specifically designed to help me suffer less. But I ran into the hard and painful wall of reality. It wasn't working at all, so I decided to take a leap of faith. Despite not being entirely sure it would work, I tried. I imagine you've grasped the crucial missing element in changing your attachment style: the desire and courage to change. But there's an important aspect that I want to clarify at this point. Everything we've seen so far, the burden of an insecure attachment style, the possibility of changing it, and the value of developing a secure attachment remains valid. It's something that has a real impact on the quality of our lives and relationships. However, like any psychological theory, it is not without limitations. To have a truly complete picture, it is essential to also consider the criticisms and limitations that have emerged over the years, as supported by various scientific studies. John Bowlby's theory initially suggested that the first attachment style developed by a child with the primary caregiver would influence all future relationships of the individual. In other words, developing an insecure attachment in childhood would condition all of that child's relationships once grown up. What we know today, however, deviates significantly from this assumption. In fact, in 2012, Karen and colleagues, in a study conducted on 2,214 people, discovered that participants had unique and distinct attachment styles depending on the type of relationship. In other words, there is no general attachment style. It is more common for a person to manifest different attachment styles based on the category of people they interact with. For example, they might have a secure attachment with their parents, an avoidant one with some friends, and an anxious style with their partner. This doesn't mean that it's impossible to have the same style in all relationships, it's just less likely. In short, the attachment style we develop as children with our parents is not as limiting and definitive as previously believed. Now let's talk about one of the most discussed criticisms. The attachment theory is based on a very firm basic principle. The attachment style the child develops depends substantially on the care received from the parent or caregiver, therefore on their ability to be present, understand the child's needs, and fulfill them. But this is simply false. Judith Gervais' study highlights that the behavior of the parent or primary caregiver influences only about 1/3 of the attachment style that the child develops. This leads us to an important reflection. If the caregiver's care is not the sole factor determining attachment style, what are the other elements that play a role? One such aspect is genetics. Some research has shown that genetics can account for between between 14 and 25% of a person's attachment style. For example, the study Genetic Correlates of Adult Attachment Style by Chun and colleagues demonstrates that in adults, certain variants of the DRD2 and 5-HT2A genes are associated respectively with anxious and avoidant attachment. The A1 variant of the DRD2 gene is linked to a lower presence of dopamine receptors in a specific area of the brain, which can make it harder to regulate emotions and increase the risk of social anxiety, thus explaining the predisposition to anxious attachment. Similarly, the T102C variant of the 5-HT2A gene is associated with lower serotonin activity in the prefrontal cortex, reducing the need for social connections and favoring avoidant behaviors. In addition to these two genetic variants, there is a third related to the DRD4 gene, which has been widely studied in the context of infant attachment. In particular, the 7R variant is associated with greater sensitivity to environmental influences, both positive and negative. Children carrying this variant tend to be more vulnerable in adverse environments, but can also derive greater benefits from supportive contexts. In this case, the genetic factor is strongly intertwined with the environment, making the gene-environment interaction a key element. There is, however, an important limitation. Although it is clear that genetic correlations exist in attachment style, their precise magnitude remains uncertain. We know that genes play a role, but establishing the exact weight of their contribution relative to other factors remains difficult to define. According to DeWolf and Van Eisendorn, a meta-analysis that included 66 studies and 4,176 participants revealed that caregiver sensitivity influences attachment style by only about 24 to 32%. But if genetics accounts for 14 to 25% and caregiver sensitivity for 24 to 32%, what determines the remaining approximately 50%? Several factors contribute to this remaining portion. For instance, family income, family size, the age and education level of the parents, and significant stressful events such as the loss of a parent, the birth of a sibling, serious illness, or traumas. Even family dynamics such as marital difficulties or the breakdown of a marital relationship can have an impact on this remaining 50%. And it doesn't end there. Relationships outside the family, such as those with friends, teachers, or other significant figures, play a role. So we can remove some psychological weight from parents, at least regarding this aspect. It doesn't depend entirely and exclusively on you. Another well-known limitation concerns the almost exclusive focus of research on a single type of relationship. The vast majority of strange situation studies were conducted primarily with the mother as the reference figure. This approach reflected the prevailing social model in which mothers were typically the main caregivers. However, this has led to focusing almost exclusively on the mother-child relationship, which obviously results in a limited approach. Indeed, subsequent studies have shown that other figures, such as the father, grandparents, uncles, cousins, and even older siblings, can form significant attachment bonds with children. However, the initial models of Bowlby and Ainsworth tended to minimize the importance of these bonds. Another aspect that has not been sufficiently considered is cultural differences. In some non-Western societies, childcare is shared among multiple caregivers, and this collective model can generate forms of attachment that do not necessarily follow the primary figure paradigm as conceived in traditional Western models. Now let's move on to the final major limitation and critique. Imagine this scenario. You've decided to change your attachment style. You started with a predominantly anxious style, but with work and commitment, you've made great strides. About half of the behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes that were once typical of the anxious style now correspond to those of the secure style. But the doubt arises. At this very moment, what exactly is your attachment style? This scenario leads us to ask, do well-defined, rigid attachment styles really exist? Some time ago, I made a very in-depth video about psychopathy, and even in that case, people initially tended to categorize the disorder very rigidly. You either had it or you didn't. Over the years, however, this view has changed, giving way to the concept of a spectrum, which implies the existence of different shades and levels of psychopathy. The same goes for attachment styles. In a study conducted by Fraley and Spiker, strange situation data were analyzed on a sample of 1,139 children. The authors of the study wanted to understand whether the differences in children's attachment styles were distributed into distinct groups or followed a continuous scale. To do this, they used statistical techniques called taxometric analyses, which determine whether a phenomenon divides into separate categories or varies gradually. The results showed that the differences in children's attachment styles tend to be more a matter of continuous variation rather than of distinct separate groups. This implies that children, and in my view adults as well, can exhibit traits from different attachment styles in a more fluid and variable way rather than being rigidly classified into a single category. In addition to the video on psychopathy, I've published another one that truly amazed me. I was struck by the responses and comments I received. Here are a few. The video is this one, where I explain how to stop taking things personally.